Class trips and school excursions can not only be fun but can also go completely wrong. A group of students from Lower Bavaria had to learn that just this year. The 11 high school students and their 2 teachers wanted to cross the Alps by bicycle as part of a charity event and raise money for a good cause. But the 11th graders had obviously completely underestimated how exhausting such a tour can be. When they also had to fight their way through snowfields with their mountain bikes at 2,600 meters altitude, their strength finally left them. And so, already on the second day of their alpine tour, the group had to send out an emergency call and was then picked up by a police helicopter. In fact, school trips often fail because of overconfidence. Just 2 years ago, for example, 99 students and 8 teachers got into distress in the Austrian Kleinwalsertal. Instead of leading the 12 to 14-year-old students along a marked hiking trail, one of the teachers had picked a hiking route from the internet that was described there as a classic after-work walk. But in reality, the trail completely overwhelmed the students, and after some collapsed from exhaustion, Mountain Rescue had to pick up nearly 100 teenagers in groups with a helicopter. Even a crisis intervention team had to be deployed, and many students needed psychological support. The next school trip will probably also remain in everyone's memory forever, though for completely different reasons. 9 years ago, a Taiwanese school class went to an art museum, and when one of the 12-year-olds briefly wasn't paying attention, he stumbled, but luckily managed to catch himself before he fell. The only problem was that in the process he accidentally punched a hole with his fist into one of the exhibited paintings. And even worse, it happened to be a 350-year-old work worth an incredible $1.5 million. At least the painting was insured. Also truly absurd is what happened on a class trip in 2006. That year, a school class from England went on a trip to Portugal and partied hard there. The supervising teacher gave the teenagers complete freedom, so they were allowed to party until well past midnight and drink alcohol. When one of the boys brought a girl back to the youth hostel, the teacher even gave him his room key so the two could retreat and have fun together. What until this point might still sound like a legendary school trip soon turned into a nightmare. Because after the 2 teenagers had enjoyed themselves in the teacher's room, they discovered that he had filmed them the whole time with a hidden camera. It turned out the teacher had planned everything carefully in order to watch his 2 students. For this, he not only lost his job, but also ended up in court, where he was eventually sentenced to probation. Sometimes school trips still go completely wrong even when they are already over. For example, when parents in a US state wanted to pick up their small children from the bus after a class trip, the bus driver refused to let them get off, probably because they had behaved badly. The driver kept the doors locked and even drove off again, despite the children crying and begging. But one mother wouldn't accept that. Angry, she stopped the bus and thus ended the questionable disciplinary measure of the driver. However, slapping the driver in the face caused her to lose it completely. And so she stepped on the gas and sped away with the children still inside. At the next traffic light, the chaos ended when an older student jumped out of the window and the mother stood in front of the bus. That way, all the children could gradually be freed through the windows by their parents. The next school trip also went wrong because the children couldn't behave properly. More precisely, a single student. The 15-year-old German girl wanted to skip the long remaining part of a hike in the Austrian mountains and simply chose a shortcut off the official trail, even though the students had been warned countless times beforehand not to do exactly that. The teenager fell 26 feet deep into a glacier crevasse and had to be rescued with tremendous effort. By some miracle, she escaped with only hypothermia and a few bruises and scrapes because her backpack had prevented her from sliding further down into the depths. As you surely know from your own experience, school trips rarely serve pure fun. Instead, the students are supposed to learn something. In the case of a group of English students, it was all about healthy eating, and no less a person than celebrity TV chef Jamie Oliver was supposed to teach them. The star chef had come up with something very visual. He showed the little kids in his kitchen how chicken nuggets are made. Step by step, he demonstrated to the students how leftovers that would otherwise end up in the trash are blended with spices, flavor enhancers, and other chemicals into a meat paste and finally turned into chicken nuggets. The idea, of course, was that the children would find fast food disgusting once they had seen how it was made. And in fact, most of the students were disgusted as they watched the chef prepare it. But when Jamie Oliver then asked who still wanted to eat chicken nuggets, the reaction was completely different from what he expected.
Now, who would still eat this?
Now we come to perhaps the worst ending of a school trip one can imagine. In 2022, 11-year-old Madalena got off the bus after a class trip and never arrived home. Or did she? At least when she got off, the girl was still caught on a surveillance camera. Only 22 days later did her mother report to the police that she had not arrived home. The unbelievable reason the mother gave for waiting so long to report her missing was that she feared trouble with the girl's estranged father if he found out his daughter was missing. Madalena's mother and her new husband were indeed jailed for reporting the disappearance of the 11-year-old girl only after 22 days, but Madalena was never seen again. The next incident on a school trip is probably every parent's and teacher's absolute nightmare. In 2008, in the US state of Massachusetts, 17 teenage girls all decided at once that they wanted to get pregnant at the same time. The high school students, none of whom were older than 16, even sealed this in a pregnancy pact. For this, the girls rather randomly chose men, some well over 20 years old and some even homeless. The pregnancy pact didn't succeed for all of them, but numerous children were born, and in 6 of those cases, the same man was said to be the father. After the scandal came to light, the school's principal resigned. Psychologists suspected that the girls were probably seeking recognition and had little self-respect. Peer pressure did the rest. By the way, this completely absurd but true story has already been made into a film twice. Let's continue with a class trip by German students that ended dramatically. While students usually enjoy it when teachers don't pay too much attention to them on a trip, in 2019, 2 teachers completely neglected a diabetic girl on a study trip to London. The 13-year-old girl neglected her blood sugar checks during the trip, and her health deteriorated drastically. So drastically, in fact, that her classmates, full of concern, turned to the teachers. But they did nothing and left the 13-year-old alone in her room to her fate. While the classmates panicked, the teachers believed the girl simply needed to recover. On the last day of the trip, the student couldn't even dress herself or brush her teeth. She died 1 day later. In 2024, the 2 teachers who had been on the study trip were sentenced for negligent homicide by omission to fines of $23,400 and $7,200 respectively. Now let's move on to a trip that was actually supposed to take place under a mother's supervision. More specifically, a ship trip from the Bahamas to New York. The problem was, however, that the children had already boarded while the mother was still taking care of a few things on land. And so the ship finally departed with the children on board, while the completely desperate mother collapsed at the dock when she realized the children were sailing away. In fact, she was only able to see them again once they arrived in New York. Another boat trip that these students will definitely remember happened a few years ago when they went out to sea to watch whales. Unfortunately, at the dock, they had spent all the money their parents had given them for the trip on candy and devoured it. But that didn't sit well with a heavy swell, and so 12 of the students couldn't enjoy whale watching at all because they were constantly vomiting. Let us know in the comments which case surprised you the most. Leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Bye and see you next time.